Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Let's take up the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper by looking at an editorial from page number 6 of the Delhi edition. This article deals with the all-party meeting that was called by the centre to discuss the political future of Jammu and Kashmir. We have covered the developments of this meeting in the last few days, but today we have an editorial and as well as a column that provide for a more detailed analysis and assessment on this issue. So first, let's look at this editorial. The editorial is of the opinion that the all-party meeting which was hosted by the centre displayed a sense of optimism towards the political future of Jammu and Kashmir, considering the fact that the talks between the Prime Minister and as well as the leaders from J&K was held in a cordial atmosphere. The key point to note over here is that back in 2019, when the special status of J&K under Article 370 was unilaterally revoked by the centre, it had caused a lot of resentment amongst the people of Jammu and Kashmir and as well as amongst the local political parties. To enforce these constitutional changes, the centre had suspended few basic rights in Jammu and Kashmir, and even these political leaders, they had been placed under house arrest by the centre. So essentially, the equation between the J&K leaders and the central government had turned hostile, and there was a lot of animosity between them due to the manner in which the centre had enforced these decisions. But now that the centre itself took the initiative to call for this meeting and reach out with a political dialogue, and the fact that the Prime Minister did not set any preconditions, and also if you look at how the J&K leaders accepted the Prime Minister's invitation, it's quite clear that the talks were held in a cordial atmosphere despite the political uncertainty on the ground in Jammu and Kashmir. And this political outreach by the centre towards the regional parties provides a sense of optimism with regard to the revival of democratic process in Jammu and Kashmir, along with a possible restoration of statehood to J&K. See, during this all-party meeting, the leaders of the centre, that is the Prime Minister and as well as the Home Minister, they have primarily focused on bringing development and progressive governance to J&K. The Prime Minister insisted that the centre is looking to establish a strong foundation for grassroots democracy in Jammu and Kashmir, and he called for a beginning to be made with the immediate conduct of the delimitation exercise, through which assembly constituencies can be drawn up, which could then be followed up by holding the assembly elections. And after these initial steps, the Home Minister has guaranteed to hold a discussion on the restoration of statehood to Jammu and Kashmir. But the regional parties from Jammu and Kashmir have taken a different stand. But despite their differences in opinion, the talks took place in a cordial environment, and this in itself gives hope for optimism with regard to restoration of democratic process in J&K. Because see, for the centre, restoration of statehood is the last priority as of now. Clearly, the statements of the PM and the Home Minister points to their priorities, which is to carry out delimitation as soon as possible and conduct assembly elections. Once these steps are taken, only then the centre is looking to restore statehood to J&K. But the regional parties of Jammu and Kashmir, they differ on the sequence of events. For them, the question of statehood comes first, as the unilateral decisions of the centre taken in 2019 compromise the pride and the rights of the people of Jammu and Kashmir. They first want discussions to be held over domicile rights that they lost, such as the special land rights and as well as the special privileges that they enjoyed under Article 35A. They also want the J&K cadre in bureaucracy to be restored so that they can take back control over their local governance. Some parties have even indicated that in the future they would like a discussion to be held on the possible restoration of special status to J&K. But however, the centre has made it clear, or at least enough signs are clearly available from the centre, that restoration of special status to J&K is highly unlikely to happen. But definitely the centre has shown willingness to talk about statehood in the future, restore statehood if possible, and these talks might even lead to discussions on other subjects such as domicile rights. That is, the rights that were exclusive to people who were domiciled in Jammu and Kashmir. Then, as we analyzed in previous sessions, even the editorial agrees that the centre's latest political outreach towards Jammu and Kashmir might have been motivated by several global and domestic factors. These include the developing situation in Afghanistan, India's improving relations with Pakistan, and the ceasefire that we have established, and as well as possible pressure from the United States. Plus, we also have an active border standoff going on with China. Several strategic experts had pointed out that these global and domestic factors might have pushed India to quickly bring back normalcy to Jammu and Kashmir in order to protect its core security interests. So now, the editorial expresses hope towards the future of Jammu and Kashmir and calls upon both the center and as well as the regional parties to look forward into the future by setting aside their past animosity. And it calls upon the center to work towards bridging the trust deficit that has been created in Jammu and Kashmir due to decades of conflict and calls for greater focus on governance related issues. But for this new political paradigm to begin in Jammu and Kashmir, the center first has to address the question of statehood of Jammu and Kashmir. While this is the last priority for the center as of now, the regional parties have made it clear that they want the question of statehood to be addressed as soon as possible. The editorial agrees with this and points out that for any genuine revival of democratic process in J&K, the question of statehood has to be resolved and it has to be restored immediately to Jammu and Kashmir. Then, in a related column on page number 6, Amitabh Mattu, an eminent academician and scholar from Jammu and Kashmir, points out that the foundation of a new Jammu and Kashmir or Naya J&K has to be built on federal democratic governance. But he disagrees with several arguments that have been made in the editorial, and he counters the arguments of several strategic experts that the center has reached out to J&K based on international pressure and global geopolitics. He rejects this argument entirely because he points out how in the early 1990s, when Kashmir insurgency was raging, the then PV Narasimha Rao government did not budge under American pressure. And even though India had lost its key support in the form of the Soviet Union due to the end of the Cold War, and even though the Indian economy itself was staring at a grave crisis, when the then US president questioned India's sovereignty over Kashmir, the Narasimha Rao government did not budge and it strongly defended India's national interests. Even the successive governments under Vajpayee, Manmohan Singh, and the others, they haven't crumbled under international pressure, especially when it comes to the question of J&K. So, according to the writer, it's highly unlikely to believe that the current Modi government, which enjoys complete majority in the parliament, would have been driven by any sort of international pressure to carry out this political outreach towards J&K. He says that when it comes to J&K, the center is unlikely to heed to any American pressure, and also the developments in neighboring Afghanistan and Pakistan are not directly consequential to the political and governance related questions of J&K. While he agrees that a return of Taliban to power in Afghanistan might increase security threats in J&K, he doesn't buy the argument that the Modi government has been solely driven by this objective to secure Indian interests in J&K before Afghanistan could possibly fall into the hands of the Taliban. Then even the ongoing back-channel talks that have been reported between India and Pakistan may not be a reason which might have pushed the center towards opening a political dialogue with J&K. Because the latest improvement that has happened in India-Pakistan relations and their landmark announcement on upholding the ceasefire has been primarily driven by Pakistan's internal problems and internal fault lines. And the writer points out that it was Pakistan which was seeking normalization with India and it was not the other way around. Hence, even with regard to Pakistan, the Modi government may not be under pressure to normalize the political situation in J&K. So in short, the writer's analysis is that the center's latest outreach towards J&K and towards the regional parties is an entirely self-driven initiative of the center because currently the government of India is negotiating from a position of absolute strength. According to the writer, the Modi government has succeeded in successfully implementing the Kautilyan policies of Sam, Dhan, Ved, and Dand. Kautilya, in his writings on statecraft, talks about these tools of diplomacy and governance, and Sam refers to persuasion through talks and negotiations, and Dhan refers to charity and donations, which will help in gaining loyalty or in purchasing loyalty, and Ved refers to discrimination, designed to exploit the weakness, and dand refers to punishment or penalties to weaken your opponents. The writer says that the central government has succeeded in this strategy of statecraft because it has successfully cornered all the stakeholders in J&K, and this has enabled the center to gain a position of absolute strength from where it can dictate terms to the regional stakeholders. Through these policies, the separatists are either in jail or those who have not been arrested, they haven't spoken about openly, targeting the policies of the center. Then the press as well has been pushed towards submission through constant scrutiny and monitoring of central law enforcement agencies. And even the regional political parties have been silenced through strong coercive action. The writer does agree that these actions of the center have been undemocratic and have led to the violation of basic fundamental rights. But this strategy of the center has given it a position of absolute strength from where it can dictate terms to the regional stakeholders. And hence he refuses to believe the argument that the center has been driven by global and regional factors to open this dialogue with J&K. Then he welcomes the dialogue that has taken place and praises both the center and the regional parties for setting aside their animosity and differences. And he hopes that this dialogue will yield something substantial, which will help address the governance and security related issues that are affecting J&K's progress. See, right now, despite the direct rule of the center over Jammu and Kashmir, governance factors have not really improved in the Union Territory. The writer clearly points out that the Union Territory's administration that falls directly under the center has failed to improve governance in the last 2 years, and delivery of services is not up to the standards expected in a functional democracy. The writer agrees that statehood should be granted to J&K to restore the pride of the people and to rebuild trust between the regional parties and the center. But when it comes to the nature of federalism and the federal relationship between the center and the state, there are a lot of options available as federalism happens to be very dynamic. See, for example, even in the United States, where federal rights of the states are inviolable, even their federal relations are dynamic in nature. Then the writer also refers to the federal policies of the British before India's independence, through which the British were looking to protect their security interests as far as their Indian colony was concerned, but they were willing to give away self-governance and autonomy in return. For this reason, the British, they sold Kashmir to the Dogra rulers, and they willingly gave self-governance and autonomy to the Dogra rulers, but in return they wanted to ensure the security of the frontiers of India. The British essentially, they didn't want to be responsible for local governance issues, but they only wanted to protect their security concerns. But very quickly the British realized that such a strategy won't work because eventually governance issues are related to your security issues. Maladministration and poor governance will always open up security challenges. So keeping this lesson in mind, the center, along with the regional parties, they will have to work together and jointly they will have to adopt the global best practices in democracy and federalism in order to ensure that J&K will progress and prosper. The writer argues that whether the center likes it or not, it cannot ignore regional parties like National Conference and the PDP and as well as the other smaller parties. Because these parties, they enjoy a local connect. They do have a grassroots presence. So through these talks and negotiations, both the sides will have to work out the most feasible arrangement which will provide for best practices in democracy and federalism to be introduced in Jammu and Kashmir, while reflecting the ethos, spirit, and the idea of India. This would require the parties, including the ruling party at the center, to embrace diversity of Jammu and Kashmir, because unity in diversity is the core identity of India. The religious, linguistic, and ethnic diversities of J&K will have to be embraced by the center and by all the political parties concerned, and together they will have to lay the groundwork for a new Jammu and Kashmir. Now let's take up a column from page number 7 that deals with the Greyhounds. The Greyhounds are an elite special force unit of the Andhra Pradesh and Telangana police, and this security force is in news because recently they carried out a major operation in the Visakhapatnam region during which they eliminated several top Maoist leaders, thereby marking a major setback to the Maoist movement in the region. So, this provides us an opportunity to talk about the Greyhounds, which has become a model security force and a case study for security forces in India and as well as around the world in tackling insurgencies. See, this elite special force unit of the Andhra Police was established back in 1989 by legendary IPS officer K.S. Vyas. Back in the 1980s, Andhra Pradesh was battling the Naxal movement led by the PWG or the People's War Group, who were essentially indoctrinated with left wing extremist ideology or also known as Maoist ideology. These Maoists or Naxals, they were dominating the dense forest areas of Andhra Pradesh, stretching all the way from eastern Ghats to coastal Andhra and as well as extending towards the Dandakaranya region, located at the junction of Andhra Pradesh, Odisha, Maharashtra, Madhya Pradesh, and Chhattisgarh. While Naxal violence was raging in this region of United Andhra Pradesh, that is before Telangana was created, the Andhra police felt a need to raise a special force which could counter the Naxals in their own backyard. That's when legendary IPS officer Kota Srinivas Vyas played a key role in the establishment of the Special Force Unit, which today has acquired legendary cult status in battling the Naxals. If you're aware of Maoist ideology, you would know that Mao Zedong spoke about utilizing the terrain of the region and the geography of the region, and he gave a call for guerrilla warfare or jungle based warfare in the people's armed struggle against the established authority. This violent extremist movement believes in overthrowing the state and capturing state power through an armed struggle that is led by the masses, that is, the farmers, the peasants, the tribal community, etc. And the Maoist warfare strategy is based upon guerrilla and jungle warfare, and this type of insurgency was posing a serious challenge for Indian police and security forces. As they were struggling to contain the situation, and as they were struggling to battle such well trained and well equipped Maoists, a need was felt to raise a counter elite force trained on similar lines, and hence the Greyhounds was raised under the leadership of K.S. Vyas as a specialist force in jungle warfare and guerrilla warfare. Eventually, K.S. Vyas himself had to pay the price, as a few years later he was assassinated by a few Naxals. But his contribution stands till date as one of India's biggest success against internal security threats. And hence, it becomes very important to understand what makes the Greyhounds of Andhra Pradesh so different from the other security forces. See, the Greyhounds, they not only specialize in jungle warfare, but they also understand the local terrain, the local language, and the local customs. The Greyhounds were essentially meant to be a local special force to deal with the Naxal threat. Just like the Naxals exploit the forests and the geography to their advantage, the Greyhounds have also been trained to exploit the local terrain and the forests to their advantage in order to fight the Naxals. Through the 1990s, these Greyhound units would go on to conduct intelligence based operations, that is, specific targeted operations against the top and middle leadership of the Naxals. This is something that set the Greyhounds apart from regular police and security forces. See, the term special force already refers to an elite force which has been provided with specialized training, and these special force commandos are very well equipped and highly motivated. For example, even our armed forces have their own special force units like the Para SF of the Indian Army, the Marcos of the Indian Navy, the Garud Commandos of the Indian Air Force, or you might have heard of the Navy SEALs of the United States. These special force units, they are slightly different from your regular police and security forces. Special forces generally operate in very small numbers, and even very small team of commandos can be very effective in inflicting severe damage against the opponent. These special forces are very well trained through a gruesome training session, and their superior training sets them apart from regular forces. Special forces such as the Greyhounds are always provided with advanced weaponry, including latest assault rifles such as AK-47s, Tavor, and they even carry machine guns and grenade launchers. They are even provided with the best of equipment including the best of logistics and communication support. And the Greyhounds are known to carry satellite phones and encrypted communication networks, as the Naxals have the ability to intercept regular radio communication or radio networks of the police. Then special forces like Greyhounds, they always carry out targeted operations that are based on real-time intelligence. And their superior training imbibes them with a very high sense of morale and motivation. Special forces usually rely upon young soldiers, and this model has been followed by the Greyhounds as well. In Greyhounds, there is a very strict limit on the number of commandos that are eventually selected, and all the young commandos, they have to be under the age of 35 years. Once they attain the age of 35 years, they either move on into a training role or they are brought into other services and they are no longer used in combat operations. So this young specialized force is led by senior experienced officers, and they are always deployed into forward positions into the actual theater of conflict, and they would be ready to launch their operations at any given moment based on actionable intelligence. These special force commandos are trained to survive in jungles for days together, and they would require very minimal outside support. They would be able to carry out their own infiltration and exfiltration, and they are even self-reliant with regard to medical support and other logistical support. It is these aspects which make special forces like Greyhounds so deadly. And along with this, the Greyhounds adopted a local customized model which has directly contributed to its success in wiping out Naxalism and Maoism in the Andhra Telangana belt. This is what makes the Greyhounds a model force or a case study for security forces in India and as well as around the world. As we discussed, the Greyhounds are largely recruited from the local population who themselves are victims of Naxalism, and the strict age limit ensures that the force is young, agile, and fit. As most of the recruits are local youth, it helps them to easily understand the local terrain and geography, just as well as the Naxals do, and they even gain expertise in local tribal languages and as well as they understand the local customs and preferences. This gives them a unique edge and a unique advantage over any outside security force. See, for example, to battle the Naxals, the central government has deployed the CRPF as the lead anti-Naxal force to supplement the resources of the state. The CRPF has even raised an elite special force of its own known as the Cobra Battalion, the Commando Battalion for Resolute Action. But the CRPF and the Cobra Commandos have never seen the same degree of success as seen by the Greyhounds. Then there has always been a debate about giving the army a lead role in tackling Naxal violence. But the government has always made a conscious decision to not deploy the armed forces for an internal security role, especially to counter Naxals, because the armed forces are not trained for such a localized conflict. The armed forces, by their very training, by their very motto, and by the kind of weaponry they carry, they are designed to use maximum force against the enemy. Such preference to use maximum force can result in a lot of collateral damage, resulting in violation of human rights and as well as civilian deaths. But in other theaters of conflict like Jammu and Kashmir and in the Northeast, the Indian Army has been given a lead role because there the dynamics of the insurgency is very different. Because J&K terrorists and the insurgents of Northeast, they receive a lot of external support from foreign countries and hostile intelligence agencies. They even enjoy safe havens in other countries and they engage in cross-border terrorism. So as a result, the army has been deployed in a lead role for counter-insurgency operations in J&K and in the Northeast, and special protection also has been given to them under controversial laws such as the AFSPA. But this has also resulted in allegations of human rights violations and gross collateral damage in these theaters of conflict. But since the Naxal movement is largely based on certain genuine grievances, and since this is purely an internal security threat, the government of India has always made a conscious decision to not deploy the army in a lead role in fighting the Naxals. There's also another factor which has influenced the decision making of the center. The center understands that outside forces like CRPF or the army, which are central forces, they're always less effective in tackling local insurgencies that enjoy the advantage of local terrain and local support. To combat such local insurgencies, a local special force unit like the Greyhounds, they are always more effective especially when they are well trained, well motivated, and given the right kind of equipment. Along with this, if you manage to create a strong local intelligence network, and if adequate human assets are deployed to collect local intelligence and to create a network of informants, then such local special forces can lead real time intelligence based operations, which can be much more effective in wiping out these insurgents. This is where the Greyhounds stand out from the other security forces because they have the advantage of understanding the local terrain, language, and customs, and they even employ unique strategy and tactics based on their training of jungle and guerrilla warfare. And this, accompanied with their superior training and high motivation and morale, along with the right kind of infrastructure, support, and weaponry, makes them a deadly lethal force against the Naxals. Plus, the state police and the state government has provided all possible perks and benefits, including extra remuneration, insurance, and social security for the family as well, in order to take care of the socio-economic well-being of the commandos along with their family members. So such facilities provided by the state motivates the forces and helps in keeping their morale high. And since the youth who are recruited are local youth, they themselves are affected by Naxal violence, thereby giving them a stronger motivation to defeat such extremist movements. All these factors have made the Greyhounds a remarkable success story for India, and hence this special force has become a case study not just in India but abroad as well. In a short span of time, the Greyhounds dealt a severe blow to the Maoists and the PWG in Andhra Pradesh, and by 2010, most of the Maoist networks were wiped out in the Andhra Telangana region. Today, a few remnants of the Naxals are still active in this region, but however, the Greyhounds have managed to keep a tight check on them. Currently, since the Naxal activity has shifted to the Dandakaranya belt, and since the Naxals are very active in the Odisha Chhattisgarh region, they often venture out into the eastern ghats of Andhra Pradesh and Telangana as well. So the Greyhounds, along with the Andhra and Telangana police, they're always on the watch out to counter any re-emergence of the threat. And as seen during the latest operation in the Vishakhapatnam region, the Greyhounds are very effective in eliminating the Naxals through intelligence-based operations. Now let's look at these articles from page number 1 and 8. According to this article, Pakistan has been retained on the grey list of FATF. So Pakistan, which runs the risk of getting blacklisted due to its failure to comply, has blamed India for politicizing the FATF. Because even being grey listed brings some economic consequences. Like I said, it becomes difficult to get loans from other global institutions. And Pakistan is reportedly suffering an annual loss of $10 billion because of its grey listing at the FATF. But India, along with other countries like US, France, and the others, they have stepped up their diplomatic pressure to force Pakistan to comply with these standards in order to put an end to Pakistan-sponsored terrorism. So for now, Pakistan will continue to remain on the grey list, and by its next review, it is expected to fulfill the 7 new targets that have been laid out by the FATF. Now let's look at the mains practice questions. The first question: restoration of statehood should be at the start of the revival of the democratic process in J&K. Critically examine the statement. The second question: evaluate the role of the Greyhounds in tackling Naxal violence in Andhra Pradesh and Telangana. Can this be a model for countering insurgencies in other parts of the country? Kindly write an answer to these questions and post your answers in the comment section below. This concludes our discussion for today. Thanks for watching.